but it is more especially in connection with the subconscious, with mysteries of the unknown guest, and what we today call abnormal psychology, with the astral body, hypnotism, and spiritualism, with the properties of the ether and of unknown fluids, with odyllic medicine, hyperchemistry, survival, and the knowledge of the future, that they must have possessed secrets to discover which the hermetics of the Middle Ages wore themselves out amid their pentacles, their cryptograms, and their books of spells, corrupted and incomprehensible. It is apparently in these regions of occultism that there is something left for us to glean, and it is to them that our metaphysics is turning back, though by other roads. It is likewise in these obscure regions that the last initiates of India, the heirs to the esoteric traditions, excel us so greatly in knowledge, producing those strange phenomena which cannot always be sufficiently explained by trickery and conjuring, and which astonish the most skeptical, the most suspicious of travelers. Have they in reserve, as they claim, yet other secrets, notably those that enable them to manipulate certain terrible and irresistible forces, such as the intramolecular energy, or the formidable and inexhaustible forces of gravitation, or of the ether? This is possible, but less certain. It is rather difficult to understand why, in cases of urgency, when there has been a question of life or death, they have never resorted to them. India, like Egypt, Persia, and Chaldea, has suffered terrible invasions which not only threatened her civilization, destroyed her wealth, burned her sacred books, and massacred her inhabitants, but also attacked her gods, violated her temples, and exterminated her priests. Yet we do not discover that she ever turned a supernatural weapon against her aggressors. It may be objected that because of the enormous expanse of the territories invaded, the invasions were never complete, that the last initiates might have fled before them, taking refuge in inaccessible mountains. Moreover, that as their kingdom was not of this world, they did not feel that they had the right to employ their superterrestrial powers, for a fundamental axiom of the highest knowledge forbids its employment in pursuit of material profit. And this too is possible. It is known the lesser fact that the British domination of Tibet, and above all the entry into that country of Colonel Young Herspan's expedition, struck a very palpable blow at the prestige of their occult knowledge. Until 1904, in fact, the occultists had regarded Tibet as the last refuge of their science. In Tibet, according to them, there were vast underground libraries, containing innumerable books, of which some dated back to the prehistoric times of the Atlanteans. And in these the supreme and immemorial revelations were recorded in tongues known only to a few adepts. In the heart of her lamasseries, swarming with thousands of monks, Tibet maintained a college of superior initiates, at the head of which was the initiate of initiates, the incarnation of God on earth, the Dalai Lama. No European, it was said, had ever violated the sacred territory of Tibet, which, by the way, was not quite correct, for in 1661, in 1715, and in 1719 2 or 3 Jesuits and a few Capuchins had found their way into the country. In 1760 a Dutch traveller made a stay in Lhasa, and in 1813 an Englishman. Then, in 1846, the missionaries Way and Gobbet, disguised as Lamas, contrived to slip into the country. But since then, despite many perilous attempts, of which the latest and best known was that of Sven Hedin, no explorer had succeeded in reaching the holy city. One may say, therefore, that of all the countries in the world, Tibet was the most mysterious, the most elusive. On the announcement of the sacrilegious expedition, strange happenings were anticipated by the world of occultists. I remember the confidence, the serene certainty with which one of the sincerest and most learned of them told me, early in the year 1904, they do not know what they are attacking. They are about to provoke, in this place of refuge, the most terrible powers. It is virtually certain that the last of the trans-Himalayan adepts possessed the secret of the formidable etheric or sidereal force, the mashmakit of the Atlanteans, the irresistible vril of which Bulwer-Lytton speaks, that vibratory force which, according to information contained in the Astra-Vidya, can reduce 100,000 men and elephants to ashes as easily as it would reduce a dead rat to powder. Extraordinary things are about to happen. They will never reach the inviolable Potala. And what happened? Nothing whatever. At least, nothing of what was anticipated. After long diplomatic negotiations, in which the incapacity, unintelligence, senility, and bad faith of the Chinese, and the childish cunning of the College of Lamas were revealed in a most disconcerting fashion, Colonel Young Husband's force, consisting chiefly of Sikhs and Gurkhas, proceeded to enter the country. In those rugged regions, the most inhospitable in the world, on the high frozen plateaus of the Himalayas, desolate and uninhabitable, they had to overcome unheard of difficulties and impasses which a handful of men, under good leadership, would have rendered unassailable. They were met more than once by the unskillful though courageous resistance of the Dalai Lama's soldiery, filled with fanatical valor by the mantras and spells of their priests, but armed with matchlocks and inferior native artillery. At length the British force drew near to Lhasa, and for 5 days the distracted abbots of the great monasteries solemnly cursed the invaders, set thousands of prayer wheels turning, and resorted to the supreme incantations. All to no avail. On August 9, Colonel Young's band made his entry into the capital of Tibet, and occupied the Holy of Holies, the House of God, the Potala, an immense and fantastic structure which soars upwards from the hovels of the city, resembling, with its terraces, its flat roofs, and its buttresses, a fortress, a piled-up mass of Italian villas, a barracks with innumerable windows, and certain American skyscrapers. The Dalai Lama, the 13th incarnation of divinity, the Buddhist Pope, the spiritual father of 600 millions of souls, had shamefully taken to flight and made good his escape. The convents and sanctuaries, swarming with monks, there were more than 30,000 of them, indifferent and resigned, were explored. But nothing was found save the relics of the noblest religion ever known to mankind, finally rotting and dwindling into puerile superstitions, mechanical prayer wheels, and the most deplorable witchcraft. And thus collapsed the final refuge of mystery. Thus were surrendered to the profane the ultimate secrets of the earth. Chapter 7. The Gnostics and the Neoplatonists. Leaving aside Plato and his school, whose theories are so well known that we need not recall them here, we shall now leave the comparatively limpid waters of the primitive religions to enter the troubled eddies which succeed them, as the simple and awe-inspiring conceptions whose very altitude hid them from view were lost to sight. Those which followed them, and were but their shattered or distorted reflections, became more turbid and increased in number. It will suffice to pass them rapidly in review. For to judge by what we know, or rather by what we know that we cannot know, they no longer have very much to teach us, and can but fruitlessly confuse and complicate the confession of the less knowable and the consequences which proceed therefrom. Before the reading of the hieroglyphs, the discovery of the sacred books of India and Persia, and the labors of our own scientific metapsychologists, the only sources of occultism were the Kabbalah and the writings of the Gnostics and Neoplatonists of Alexandria. It is not very easy to locate the Kabbalah chronologically. The Sefer Yetzirah, as we know it, which is as it were the entrance to the Kabbalah, seems to have been written about 829 A.D., and the Zohar, which is the Temple, about the end of the 13th century. But many of the doctrines which it teaches go back very much further, namely, to the Babylonian captivity, and even to the bondage of the Israelites in Egypt. From this point of view, then, we must place it before the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists. But on the other hand, it has borrowed so much from the latter, and they have influenced it so greatly that it is almost impossible to speak of it until we have said something of those to which it owes the best and the worst of its theories. It is true that these Jewish traditions, for their part, mingled their abundant streams with those of the other Oriental religions which from the 1st century to the 6th invaded the Greek and Roman theosophy and philosophy, causing men to call in question and to examine more closely the beliefs and theories by which they had lived. There was in the intellectual world, and above all in Alexandria, whither flowed all races and all doctrines, a strange force of curiosity, restlessness, and activity. For the first time at all events, so it is believed, the Hellenic philosophy found itself directly in contact with the Oriental religions and philosophies audacious, grandiose, unfathomable, which until then it had known only by hearsay or by niggardly fragments. The Gnostics contributed, among other doctrines, those of Zoroaster, while the mysterious Essenes, Theosophists and Theurgists, who came from the shores of the Dead Sea, and rather mysteriously disappeared, although in the days of Philo they were 40,000 strong, or were eventually absorbed by the Gnostics, doubtless represented the Hindu element more directly. The Kabbalists, who existed before the Kabbalah was committed to writing, infused fresh life into the doctrines of Persia, Chaldea, and Egypt. The Christians woke up to find themselves between the Bible and the legends of India, and the Neoplatonists, who might more correctly be called the Neo-Ophics or Neo-Pythagoreans, returned to the old philosophers of the 6th century before our era, striving to find in them truths too long ignored, which were suddenly restored to daylight by the revelations from the East. We need not here investigate this effervescence, which constitutes one of the most intense and, in some respects, most fruitful crises ever recorded in the history of human thought. For our present purposes, it is enough to note that from the point of view of the idea of God, of the first cause, of the pre-cosmic spirit, or the absolute reality, which precedes all being, manifest or conditioned, as from the point of view of the origin, purpose, and economy of the universe and the nature of good and evil, it teaches us nothing that we have not found in previous religions and philosophies. The manifestations of the unknowable, the division of the primordial unity, and the descent of spirit into substance are attributed to the Logos. They change their name without lessening the surrounding darkness, in the attempt to find an explanation of the insoluble contradictions involved by an impassive God and a universe in incessant movement, an unknowable God who is finally known in every detail, a good God who creates, desires, or permits evil. Men imagined, first, a threefold hypostasis, and then a host of intermediate divinities, demiurges, or reduplications of God, eons, or divine faculties and attributes personified, angels, and demons. In the backwaters of these specializations, distinctions, and subdivisions, subtle, ingenious, and inextricable, the simple though tremendous confession of the unknowable was soon submerged by such a tide of words that it was no longer visible. Before long it was completely forgotten, was no longer referred to, and the supreme unknown engendered so many and so familiar secondary divinities that it no longer dared to remind men that they could never know it. Of course, the greater the number of phrases and explanations, the more completely were the primitive verities, on which all was founded, effaced and obscured, so that after men had attained, or regained, in Philo, and above all in Plotinus, the loftiest summits of thought, they descended, on the one hand, to the lucubrations of that Chinese puzzle, the famous Pistis Sophia, attributed to Valentinian, and on the other to the pretended revelations of Iamblichus concerning the Egyptian mysteries, revelations which revealed nothing whatever, and the whole Gnostic and Neoplatonic movement ended with the successors of Valentinian and those who continued the work of Porphyry and Proclus, by sinking into the most puerile logomachy and the most vulgar witchcraft. We need not, therefore, consider the movement any further. Not that the study of this effervescence would be devoid of interest. On the contrary, there are few moments of history, Ian, or as we should say, the eternal, could be approached only by a number of emanations or eons. In other words, these were regarded as eternal beings who acted as intermediaries between the perfect eon and mankind, and, being joined together, formed the perfect eon, at which the mind has been forced to encounter problems of so novel, complex, and difficult a nature, or at which it has given proof of greater power, vitality, and enthusiasm. But what I have already said of this period is enough for my purpose, which is merely to show that the occultists of Greece, and, above all, those of the Middle Ages, who interest us more especially because they are closer to us, so that our memory of them is more vivid, have nothing essential to teach us that we have not already learned from India, Egypt, and Persia.